Welcome back in Live Now. I'm Austin Westfall. My thanks to Christina Evans, who's guided you through the past few hours. I've got you covered for the next few hours as we talk about the nation's top headlines and really the world's top headlines. We start in the Caribbean. Of course, we were tracking yesterday closely after the U.S. seized that oil tanker just off the coast of Venezuela. Venezuela now condemning the seizure of that tanker off its coast, calling it, quote, an act of international piracy. The Venezuelan government saying a statement, quote, the Republic of Venezuela strongly denounces and repudiates what constitutes blatant theft and an act of international piracy, publicly announced by the President of the United States, who confessed to the assault of an oil tanker in the Caribbean Sea, unquote. U.S. officials, of course, say that the military executed a seizure warrant for a crude oil tanker that was allegedly being used to transport sanctioned oil from Venezuela and Iran. Standing by is Shelby Holliday. She's with the Wall Street Journal. It's now been over 24 hours since we learned of the seizure, Shelby. We heard from Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt earlier today. Did we learn what the U.S. plans to do with the tanker?
Yeah, she said the U.S. plans to keep the oil. There's a legal process that it must go through in order to do that. But they are bringing the ship to a U.S. port. They plan to go through this legal process, and they plan to keep or seize the Venezuelan oil. So the Wall Street Journal has been reporting on this particular seizure and then also the legal implications around it. If this is something that the Trump administration wants to continue to do, it sounds like the administration has a legal process in place. For example, Leavitt said that the ship was seized because they had a seizure warrant. They went to a judge. The Justice Department got that warrant, and they appear to be going through all of the legal steps you need to do in order to seize the oil, the boat, or both. That's a little bit unclear at this point. But yes, they did go through a legal process, and it sounds like the oil's headed to the United States.
You know, before it was seized, is it clear where this tanker was headed?
There were rumors that it was heading to Cuba, although it is called a very large, it's considered a very large crude carrier. So it could have been going to China. If it was going to Cuba, that is significant because analysts say this is a clear sign that the U.S. is trying to sever ties between Venezuela and Cuba. The two have, there's a lot of crossover. Venezuelan oil gets sent to Cuba. Cuba provides political support, intelligence, economic support. And so if the U.S. is really trying to sort of separate these two countries and sever their ties, that would be a really significant move, and it remains to be seen if the U.S. will continue to do this. But a couple weeks ago, there was a U.S. Navy ship that blocked a tanker from moving between the two countries. And so this could be a new front in what we are seeing in the Caribbean, a new front in the Caribbean campaign.
Yeah, of course, a huge military buildup persists in the region. Lucas Tomlinson of Fox saying Press Secretary Leavitt was telling Peter Doocy that the commandeered Venezuelan oil tanker, quote, will go to a U.S. port, and the United States does intend to seize the oil. We also heard an exclusive from Axios, I think Reuters had this as well, saying that the White House is sanctioning 3 nephews of Maduro's wife, as well as the regime. I believe they're sanctioning 6 companies and ships that are tied to them as well. I need to ask you, Shelby, how is the Venezuelan government in general responding to everything that's happening this week?
You read the statement. They called this the seizure of the tanker like blatant theft and extremely hostile to the Venezuelan regime. They actually accused the Trump administration of trying to steal Venezuela's natural resources. We've heard from dictator Nicolás Maduro. He was giving a speech and doing some singing, I believe, last night, according to my colleague who's down there. But so far, the analysts who are watching the regime closely say he doesn't necessarily believe that the U.S. will escalate to the point where he has to go. In other words, he doesn't believe that land strikes are coming in a way that would threaten his hold on the country or even threaten his life. And so for now, I think this is a huge sign that the U.S. is willing to go after the lifeblood of the Maduro regime. They're willing to seize oil tankers and oil and cut off the regime's main flow of cash. But it doesn't necessarily mean that Maduro will have to be forced from power. He has actually survived much worse in the past.
We know that Venezuela is referred to as a narco-state. Is there a way to quantify how important oil is and how important the narco business is to Maduro's regime?
That's a good point. And just to back up for a second, we've seen drug boats get bombed for the last couple months. More than 20 of the strikes. The viewers are probably very familiar with those. And while that seems like a very different effort, the striking of these small boats, in the Trump administration's mind, it is connected because they see this campaign about is going after foreign terrorist organizations. And they have labeled Maduro as the person who is atop those foreign terrorist organizations. And they allege that he makes his money from drugs and oil. And so these two actions, the seizure of this huge, large tanker and the blowing up of these small fishing boats, they seem unrelated, but to the Trump administration, it is all very much a part of the same campaign. And with the tanker now in the mix, it is almost a tightening of the screws in the negotiations with the Maduro regime to try to get Maduro to leave power. Some analysts saw it as a move that would just raise the stakes in terms of the negotiations.
Any of the sources that the Wall Street Journal is talking to, or perhaps any of the analysts that you've spoken to, what's the level of clarity on whether or not Venezuela has any means at all militarily to respond to what's going on?
That's a really good question. Venezuela does have air defenses that could potentially threaten U.S. assets and U.S. forces. So we've seen a lot of bomber missions fly down near the coast of Venezuela. We saw some F-18s the other day doing loops in the Gulf of Venezuela. The U.S. appears to be probing those air defenses, and these missions appear to be sort of mapping out Venezuela's air defenses and other responses to any sort of bombing campaign. And they do have a lot of Russian and Iranian equipment. These are their partners internationally, and they have received support from both Russia and Iran. They are also potentially using some equipment from China. And so it's not an easy thing to fly into the country and conduct land strikes if President Trump chooses to do so. And the U.S. appears to know that and is doing some very strategic things in the air to try to map it all out and try to get a better sense of how they might respond should the U.S. move forward on strikes.
Expand on that if you can. How tight is the connection between Venezuela and Iran?
It's quite tight. They're very close partners. Same with Venezuela and Cuba. The Iranian regime, I think it's quite well known that Iran has people on the ground in Venezuela. What is unclear is how much support Venezuela is receiving right now. My colleagues at the Journal published a piece the other day about essentially Venezuela's partners, including Iran and Cuba, offering political support, and Russia, but not much else. We're not seeing huge cargo planes full of military equipment landing in Caracas, for example. And so while the regime does have close allies politically, it's not getting a lot of help militarily in terms of defense assets.
So what are your major questions moving forward? What are we watching for next?
We've seen a lot of assets in open source intel showing us that there are more U.S. assets moving into theater. We've seen a huge buildup already in the past few months. But just this past week, we're seeing Growler aircraft that can do jamming and electronic warfare. We are seeing tankers moving into the Caribbean. They've been there, but these are just more tankers. And those are aircraft that can refuel bombers, for example. And we're starting to see more and more signs that the U.S. is really setting the stage for airstrikes. And if President Trump, again, if he chooses to go forward with them, those assets are in place. And so those are the things I'm watching in the next couple days.
All right. We appreciate your time. Of course, Shelby Holliday with the Wall Street Journal joining us today. Thanks for the insight.